Neither team is getting much love in the preseason, but the October matchup between Baylor and Iowa State could be a matchup of dark horses in the Big 12, or at least some pretty good toe stubbers. This is Locked On Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Howdy there, Bears fans. Welcome to another episode of Locked On Baylor, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. I'm your host, Cam Stewart of ESPN Central Texas and the Cam Show on Rogue Media Sports Network. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and thank you for making it your first listen today and every day. In our next stop on the preseason truck stop tour of the Big 12, we look at Iowa State, who I've been very complimentary of this whole offseason. I really do believe this Cyclones team should be ranked already. I think they return a lot. I think they're very good. We're going to talk with Bill Seals, who covers them inside and out, to see why Iowa State is a team to watch for, not just in the Big 12, but maybe nationally this year. And as we start to get more optimistic about Baylor, how that matchup could be the battle of the dark horses come early October. But we'll take a look at that Cyclones offense and what is different from last year, how Rocco Becht can give this whole conference some problems. And we'll get to the bottom of why Iowa State hates Baylor. Is it more than just the tents? We're going to find out with my pal, Bill Seals. I am with Bill Seals of the Cyclone Report, covering all things Iowa State. And Bill, it must feel, first off, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having
me. It must feel like a weird offseason that you haven't had to stave off the Matt Campbell coaching somewhere else rumors the whole year. How was that a bit of a change of pace from what we've seen in some of the good Cyclones teams that have been put together the last 5, 6, 7 years here?
Yeah, it has been kind of nice to not have to cover that aspect of it, but I've kind of long held to my belief that just the way that Matt's wired, that I think there's as good a chance of him going back to his alma mater, Mount Union, and coaching D3 football than it is for him to want to go coach in LA or wanting to go coach in certain locales around the country. It's just kind of the way he's wired and the way he likes to run things.
Yeah, and hey, Mount Union, that's a good program.
Right.
You could do a lot worse than that, Matt.
Yeah.
I would say. And the benefit of it, which I forgot to mention in that buildup, is like Dave Aranda was rumored for jobs a couple years ago, and now we don't have to stave that off, but it's for a different reason. Iowa State had a tough start to 2023 and really turned things around. And at one point in the middle of that season, still looked like outside contenders for the Big 12 championship. And here we go again, coming off a winning record where there was all kinds of turmoil within the program last year with Hunter Deckers and that situation. And all they do is fall behind, come back, and have a good season. They go into 2024 returning a lot, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And all you hear about is Utah and Kansas State and Kansas. And how do you feel Iowa State kind of slots into this year's Big 12 championship race as we look at it in August?
Well, first off, I think that just the way, outside perceptions might be, I think that goes right into Matt Campbell's wheelhouse. He's had his most success when no one's really expected them to do anything. I think the players are probably the ones, maybe at least publicly, that might take exception with. I think it was 6th place that the media picked Iowa State to finish in. I have them finishing a little higher than that, I think. But I think that the way that last season ended maybe might have soured a few teams. They go down and just a stinker of a game.
Yeah.
In the Liberty Bowl against Memphis, and just the offense in that game totally one-sided. The offensive line was terrible. So I think that was the last impression for a lot of those outside of Ames, Iowa, of that Iowa State program. So, but yeah, as you mentioned, they at certain points of 2023, they were looked at as a team that could qualify to get back to the Big 12 championship game again. It didn't end up happening. As far as the Baylor game, I mean, that one in Waco was probably one of the high marks of last season. Certainly, how they wrapped things up against Kansas State in the snow and blowing offensively just blowing the doors off there. A pretty good defense in K-State. So yeah, it was a team last year. They started slow, 1-2, and kind of took the reins off of Rocco Becht. It looks like we'll talk about him here in a little bit, but he's one that's in just, I think, has to be in a totally different mindset and outlook coming into this season, being what he had to endure in 2023.
And we will talk about Rocco Becht. I will get to him. I'm a big Rocco Becht fan myself, and I was thinking about that Kansas State game in preparation for our show here because, it was obviously it had a lot of the nation's eyes on it because of the snow on the field, and it became this cool thing to watch. And all of a sudden, you're like, whoa. We knew Kansas State wasn't the Kansas State from the year before, but that was a team I was high on last year, and I'm high on them this year. And I look at Iowa State, and I'm like, I don't see a lot of difference here between them and Kansas State, and they beat Kansas State last year. So I don't see a lot of difference there. In terms of the defense for Iowa State, which, people are pretty high on, but in that topsy-turvy season, one of the things you could count on was that defensive backfield, and of course TJ Tampa being a huge part of that. The one downside I thought to the defense was that pass rush. It was in the hundreds in terms of sacks on the season. There weren't even a lot of coverage sacks, even with some great coverage. But Matt Campbell has said recently he thinks that's going to be a strength for his team this year. So is there talks of a drastic improvement in that pass rush? And if so, what does that do for this defense?
Well, they're a year older, so naturally I think they're going to get better and just experience-wise. And a lot of those guys, pretty much all of them, I think, are back. And it was a young group last year. They went out into the transfer portal and got Kennard Snyder out of Louisiana Monroe, from what I understand. Well, he was even one that Matt Campbell mentioned yesterday in his media availability as one of the standouts in camp. And he's a defensive end that's added, I think, a little bit different dimension as well. And they've got some guys they recruited out of the high school ranks. Ikena Eziago, Samuel Samay, a couple of those other young pass rushers working their way up through the ranks. I think redshirt sophomore, redshirt freshman, those two respectively. Joey Peterson back. He started, I think, pretty much every game a year ago. So they've got so much. Granted, as you mentioned, the production-wise, it was down. They never really had an answer for Will McDonald, the pick of the New York Jets, the first rounder. Even before that, Jaquan Bailey. Those two are still the program's leading all-time sack guys. And I think Will McDonald ended. He's in a tie now for the all-time lead in the Big 12, even with a Texas Tech guy. Name escapes me, but yeah, I mean, it just all that production left and they never really replaced it. So now they're a year older. You get Kennard Snyder out of the transfer portal. I think one other way that maybe things improve is a little more talk of going into a 4-down set. Now they were, Campbell said it was about 20% last year that they were in that. I think maybe a little more this year to just kind of start to maybe, I guess, organically kind of help get to the quarterback a little bit more with more down linemen. Dominic Orange and J.R. Singleton are back too on the inside of that defense. And before, when they're in a 3-3-5, those two guys are rotating in and out. Granted, it keeps them fresh and all, but those are, as you look at those two guys, those are probably two of the top maybe 6 or 7 players, regardless of position. I would put them in that category on defense. So they want to try to get them in on the field more times this season. So they'll do that, I think, a little bit. That probably helps get a little bit more pressure too.
Look, you've heard me talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, by the way. Well, we have something a little different for you because now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to download America's #1 sportsbook. Once again, that's FanDuel.com/locked-on. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And what's funny about that is, we're talking about their lower than 100 in sacks, and yet they had the #2 total defense in the conference. They had the #2 rushing defense in the conference. It just seemed to be very much that passing down, passing specialty, and defense is usually the specialty when we're looking at Matt Campbell's Iowa State teams. But you look across the board here, we talked about Rocco Becht a little bit, but you're like, oh, that guy's coming back on offense.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and he's coming back too. And it feels like the first time in a few years that we're able to say, it looks like Iowa State's offense might actually be the strength of their team. And this is coming from an outsider. Am I onto something there?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's certainly the way a lot of those outside of Ames, I think a lot of the talk is on that offense, and it makes sense. Rocco Becht, right? The Jaden Higgins, Jalen Noel, I think those two lead a wide receiver room at Iowa State that is going to be as deep as it's been, I think, under Matt Campbell. I think they did take a little bit of a hit there with Daniel Jackson. He's, I think, a Cibolo Steel grad from Texas several years ago, 2020 class, I think. But he was going to be another one of those veteran guys. He's out for the year now with a lower leg injury. So you've got Higgins and Noel still. Those guys are both seniors. That's where a lot of the production's coming back wide receiver wise. Jackson was a nice piece. So now they get into that depth a little bit more. But yeah, certainly it makes sense. The offense is the spotlight right now. Ben Bramer, the tight end, is a true freshman, had a lot of great plays last year as well. The offensive line, all 5 of those guys are back. So that's, and we haven't talked about the offensive line yet, but that was also one of those you mentioned where the pass rush was in the hundreds nationally. Well, you look at the PFF grades for the run blocking and the pass blocking a year ago, they were in the hundreds there as well, the 120s, I think even 132nd, I believe, in run blocking. So
how many more programs than that?
Right. No, there's not. I think 133 they could grade. So about as bad as they could get. But I guess if there's a positive, all 5 starters at the end of the year are back. They go out and get into the transfer portal for a couple. I think one of those, Jalen Travis out of Princeton, is going to be a day 1 starter at one of those tackle spots. Dylan Barrett, they go get him, an interior guy from Wisconsin. So that's going to be the whole thing. We talk so much about the skill players at Iowa State coming back, but that offensive line has to take a big step forward to allow the Cyclones to tap into that.
And the reason I am a media guy and not a coach is going to be apparent because I'm going to go back to the skill position guys here. Let's talk Rocco's modern life. Rocco Becht, a guy who I was pretty high on last year, and you mentioned it a little earlier. You kind of let the reins off him a little bit in the middle of the season. Now, I'm going to go on a limb here, okay? It's not a direct comparison, but I see Rocco Becht, and I see a guy who probably gets overlooked for size, but pretty accurate passer, get out of the pocket a little bit. I saw a guy for 4 years do that at Iowa State in my time at Baylor. That was pretty good. He's making a decent living in the NFL right now. That's Brock Purdy, of course, for my Baylor fans. Rocco Becht, just tell me what kind of jump you expect him to make this year based off what you saw last year.
Well, I think statistically he's going to make another big jump. I think he already, as far as freshman records, he was a redshirt freshman, but broke some records as far as freshman passing at Iowa State. And that was even with them kind of putting the reins on him a little bit to start the season. Really, they didn't kind of lift those off until probably even maybe they did a little bit against Ohio because they had to. They were losing that game. That's how bad of a start they got off to. But then they get into conference play is kind of when they start to turn him loose a little bit. But still, this is going to be an offense that they want to be as balanced as possible. Abu Sama, the leading rusher, he's back. He's the one that had all the highlight reel plays against Kansas State in that road win. But I think production-wise, certainly Rocco's going to make an even bigger step this year. I think because they're going into this season, they know who they've got with him. They know who the pieces are around him. Everybody's back. So really, there's not going to be an excuse for a slow start with this team, with this offense. So he's the guy. He's known that all year, all off season. He in 2023 he didn't really find out he was going to be the guy until even after spring ball, and then had 3 months to get ready to take that role. Whereas now he's had it and he's entrenched as the man.
And how much of a difference do you think that makes? Because we see that a lot with quarterbacks, and they're battling for a job, and then they get a lot of live action, obviously live bullets for a whole season, and then they get a whole offseason as being the guy. How much do you think that makes a difference for a kid that's still young like Rocco Becht?
I think it's huge. I mean, he's just taken it to a whole other level, become one of the undoubted leaders of the team, and he, as a redshirt freshman coming in, maybe the situation he was a year ago, I don't know if there were certain times maybe he was a little reluctant, just given his experience and stature maybe at that point. But I think having that full season as a starter under his belt, no doubt a leader and someone that I think that the staff puts a lot of trust in. They also have a new offensive coordinator as well this year, and Taylor Mauser, someone who's been around. So I think with that, granted, he's been with them since day one in different roles, started out as a recruiting assistant and worked his way up. But I think just the connection there, you've got a new offensive coordinator, but with Rocco and his experience, I think it's been a pretty seamless transition there.
And in terms of on the field, and I'll make that specification, especially for the next question. But I talk all with these hosts who are covering other teams in the Big 12, and it seems to be a consensus that there's a big middle class in this year's Big 12 that could go a bunch of different ways. And I think, we talked about all the positives about Iowa State, but I think Iowa State could still find itself in the upper middle class, if you will. So what would have to go wrong on the football field for this team to have the wheels fall off, whether that means 6-6 or 3-9 or 7-5 or whatever it may be? What would have to go wrong in the football field for it to go wrong?
Well, I think this is probably the case at a number of programs around the country, and certainly I think in the transfer portal era and everywhere else where there's no depth anymore at the quarterback position. Well, Iowa State didn't have anybody leave in the transfer portal per se, but I mean, it's Rocco Becht and then some unproven guys at quarterback. Granted, one of those, the backup now, J.J. Cole, was a 4-star in his own right. He'll be a redshirt freshman this year, but I think Rocco goes down. That would probably be one thing that could lead to some dark days, just because you go to a quarterback with not a whole lot of experience. We haven't really seen much of him. So that's one thing. Probably the offensive line. We just talked about that. Those guys, if they don't make a huge step and they can't get into kind of the skill players and then maybe on the defensive side of the ball as well. They had a lot of injuries last year on that back end, especially at the safety position, and they still performed pretty well. But I think they've got great depth there, but maybe on that defensive line or maybe at linebacker, if they get some injuries, how's that depth going to look? And how does that affect maybe how aggressive they can play, or just how they play in general, I suppose.
You've heard me talk a lot about passion, drive, and patience, and for good reason, because those things that are the formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, so much more. Whether it's speed, power, or style for you, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you're always going to find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber. You are not burning cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home those huge wins. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, and that eBay guaranteed fit is only available to our U.S. customers. And once again, that is ebaymotors.com. And in terms of technically outside the football field, this is a tough schedule. I talked with our pal from Utah a few weeks ago and had the exact opposite conversation. They got an easy schedule, but you'll get this one. It's week 2 at the old rivals in Iowa City. You've got games at West Virginia, which could be a pretty tough game this year. It's always a tough place to play when they're even halfway decent. At Kansas, which is at Arrowhead, and at Utah, hosting a Kansas State team, but a lot of tough road games. Do you think that could be a hurdle for this Iowa State team, or do you think they've matured enough? I know it's tough to say in August.
Yeah, I actually kind of like the way the schedule this year played out. Right. Certainly the Utah game that you mentioned, the next to last of the regular season is going to be a tough one, going out there playing for the first time. They did pretty well in Utah last year playing against BYU, but I think Utah's in another class there. But other than that, I think they get a lot of those tough games at home, which is key. We've talked about the Kansas State one to wrap up the regular season. They also get Baylor at home. Those games have been back and forth ones in recent years. They get the Bears up in Ames. Texas Tech, they haven't played well in Lubbock over the years, and they get the Red Raiders back up in Ames. I think if they can go 3-0, you mentioned the Iowa game, the rivalry there early on. They haven't fared well in that game, but gosh, I think with some of the issues Iowa's had on the offensive side of the ball, probably none of that really matters to you too much.
We see a lot of it.
Chronicled on a national level,
exactly.
Iowa's struggles there, but gosh, and all the experience that ISU has coming back, that's certainly a game I think is winnable out there. So you go 3-0 in the non-conference, you come open the Big 12 with Houston at home. Then Houston on the road, excuse me. I think that's a game that they can win, a team that's in transition there. Then you get Baylor at home. So those are 5 games right off the bat that I think they have got to feel pretty good about. So I think it's going to be a matter of getting off to a fast start. That hasn't really been a thing for in Matt Campbell's days. They used to call it Brocktober. When Brock Purdy was there, because the team every year, for one reason or another, they'd get off to those slow starts, but October they'd hit their stride. Now it's, I guess you could call it Rocco-tober or whatever, but they I think again, but this year, with everybody coming back, all that production, there's not really any excuses, at least to me, for a slow start. So I think that the schedule's well positioned for them to do that. That they've got the 2 really difficult ones between 2 teams that are mentioned as championship contenders, and Utah and Kansas State to wrap up. So I think they've got to put themselves in good position though early on.
And certainly if they do play to their strengths and do get off to a hot start, I think that could combat some of the, young guys playing on the road kind of thing. But these guys also got to take the training wheels off a little bit last year. Okay, big question for you, Bill. We talk about a potential dark horse here in Iowa State. Flash forward to December. Could they be playing in Arlington for the Big 12 championship?
I think no doubt about it. They've got it. I look at them as one of probably 4 teams right now that I'd consider as favorites to get out there. Certainly Kansas State and Utah getting a lot of preseason hype. Maybe Arizona coming into the conference. Kansas certainly has maybe a stake in that as well. So as you mentioned here a few minutes ago, the top middle class or upper class. And I think that Iowa State's certainly in that mix. They're going to have to, again, get off to that good start. And it could come down to how they play those final 2 weeks. I think that they go into those final 2 weeks of the conference season certainly in position, and a lot of the mocks will probably have them playing in Arlington, but you end with those two, so they could end up having to win both, but I think they have to win at least one, and obviously K-State at home is probably going to be that one that they will absolutely have to have.
Now, one more question before I get you out of here, because the Baylor fans will not forgive me if I don't ask it. Some people think they know. I don't know. I need an explanation from the Iowa State side of things. Why does Iowa State hate Baylor? Why do the fans hate Baylor? Is it as simple as the tents? Is that it?
Well, that was probably one of them.
I just remember the fight the year before too.
Yeah, that was what I was going to bring up. I think that was David Montgomery's last year before he went to the Bears. Now he's with the Lions, but yeah, he was right in the middle of that, and I think some suspensions came out of that. I think they've got Iowa State fans. I think they've got a lot of respect really for Aranda. I've heard him several times at Big 12 media days. He's an impressive guy. Mm-hmm. I think the one that really rubbed Iowa State fans them the wrong way was probably Matt Rule. And, now naturally he's at Nebraska. So that's another one, Iowa State fans love to hate Nebraska. So Rule has just been naturally a target there. But I don't get the sense for as much animosity maybe with Aranda, but I think a lot of it, maybe a little bit of it is carried over from when Matt Rule was down there.
Okay, gotcha. I was thinking like chicken and the egg, was it the tents? Was it the fight? Did the fight provoke it? I don't know. But and it has dissipated the last few years.
And Aranda's a class guy. I love that. I love him. He's one of my favorite, Big 12 coaches outside Iowa State. Sataki at BYU is another one that love hearing that guy talk as well. So.
Yeah, we just got to hope they all stick around. It's been a lean couple of seasons for both those guys. And I find myself rooting for Iowa State in other games. I'm obviously not a fan, but we have common enemies, so I'm into that. But Bill, I'm sure the people would love to follow what's happening with the Cyclones leading up to this game in the first week in October. So how can they find your work and keep up to date with all that the Cyclones football program has going, and basketball when we get to that?
Right. Yeah, that'll be another big one. November 4th, I think, is when they start. It gets earlier and earlier. So
yeah,
a lot of anticipation for basketball season, as I'm sure there is in Waco as well. But Iowa State, we're the Iowa State site on the Rivals network of team sites, Cyclone Report. So one of the most exhaustive previews you'll read a week in and week out of football season. Thousands of words on each opponent. I roll that out every Friday before game days. That's pretty well received. So, and of course, recruiting is a huge focus as well. We'll be getting into game day visits here in about 2.5 weeks. So a lot of great recruiting coverage as well, and then basketball on tap. Tons of talk about that. And I mean, it's kind of nice we're getting so close to football game day now, because I think after what Iowa State's done on the basketball court and winning the Big 12 tournament, a lot of this offseason basketball has kind of been the main headlines around basketball. So now it's kind of nice to get into football mode here 100%.
Can't wait. That's how you can keep up with these Cyclones. Bill, thanks so much for coming on. October 5th, we've got it circled. Can't wait.
Thanks for having me, Cameron. Really appreciate it.